All right, so we already talked about the speaker, the occasion, the shift in this poem, and the title. And now we're going to talk about some things that are a little bit more nitty gritty in poetry, such as rhyme scheme, repetition, and things of that nature. So, um, this rhyme scheme in here is a pretty simple one, and it's an ABA rhyme scheme. And what that means, if that's new to you, is the way to tell what a rhyme scheme is that first word that rhymes with something else, you're going to put a letter A next to it because A is the first letter of the alphabet. And then every time you find a line that rhymes with it, it's also an A. So master and disaster rhyme. So these two are A. Okay. Intent does not rhyme. We have a new rhyme pattern starting here, and that one is B. And this poem follows that throughout ABA, 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 because there's end rhyme at the end of all of these lines until the end, and then we get into a slightly different pattern. Okay, and all end rhyme means is that the last word in the line rhymes with the next last word in the line, or with another line going down. Okay, that's all end rhyme means. Sounds kind of fancy. So there's a definite pattern here, and that pattern helps create a rhythm for us as readers. It makes it more memorable for us because whenever things rhyme, it's just easier for us to kind of get in our head, and kind of has a more sing-songy feel to it. All right. Now we do see some places where the rhyme is a near rhyme, which means that the word almost rhymes perfectly, but not quite. And not everyone does this. This is just like my own thing, but I put a lowercase a there to show that it wasn't a complete rhyme like the higher case. But we see fluster and disaster kind of rhyme, and so do master. And then we see that again here at last or. And maybe you could argue that gesture and master also don't completely rhyme. So we got some things here that don't completely rhyme. And that's another place to look at a possible shift or make it more complicated, right? Because whenever a writer breaks the rules and either completely by a non-rhyming word altogether or an approximate line, you got to ask yourself, is there something going on here? And maybe there's nothing. Maybe that's just like the closest word they could come up with, and that's why it's an approximate rhyme. But maybe it's meant to draw our attention to it a little bit closer and think, oh, what's this word meaning? Does it have a little bit more meaning than I might think? So when I think about the word fluster, and I think about this poem, and how the speaker is saying that the art of losing is kind of easy and it's not a big disaster, I see this word fluster and I start to think that maybe it is bigger than they think by saying they're like, when you get flustered, you're kind of getting overwhelmed, you're kind of getting worked up. And so even though she says to accept the fluster, this kind of sticks out to me and thinks maybe we really can't accept the fluster of losing things, even if it is hard to master. So I see a little turn here in some complex meaning, maybe. Um, and another one here is last or. And once again, when you lose something, right, it's final, right? Or it can be if you don't find it again, right? So like this last or maybe is letting us to think about the finality of losing, and there's a pause here, or, right? So that's just some thinking there. Once again, it may just be the closest words, but if we're trying to maybe unpack some meaning that the poet might have left there, then maybe those are some things that are going there. And then gesture, not quite as rhyme scheming, and it rhymes with master disaster. And I think we're just trying to look at this stanza a little bit more closely in general and see what else is what else is going on. That joking voice of the person they lost, and a gesture that they love, really focusing on this person and how important they were to the speaker, right? So something to think about is when you get to a near rhyme, it does two things. One, it breaks up the sing-songiness of a poem, so it doesn't maybe sound so elementary or childlike. Gives it a more sophisticated rhyme scheme or feel. But it also might be that we're meant to look at these words a little bit more closely and think about why the poet or speaker might be highlighting them. Okay, so that's kind of our rhyme scheme there and our approximate rhyme. Now, the other thing I want to point out is this poem repeats a lot, right? So the reason I have a 1 and a 2 next to these is because these lines are partially repeated throughout the poem. Okay, the art of losing isn't hard to master. And then we see that kind of throughout, and then also the line about disaster. So you might think, oh, that's kind of weird or interesting. This is a specific kind of poem. It's a villanelle. Okay. And this is what a villanelle does. It has this ABA rhyme scheme throughout until the end when you get two A's to end it in a row. And it also repeats the first and third line of the first stanza throughout the poem. And each time it's repeated, it kind of gives it a different feel or a different effect, right? So some people argue that a villanelle is written to have an intense meditation on a particular idea or thought. Whenever you're thinking about something throughout the day, it kind of rolls around different ways, and if you got something big on your mind, it takes on different meanings, or you think about it one way in the morning, in the afternoon think about it a different way, or maybe even get a little obsessive about something, right? And so we see this here. This speaker is definitely meditating on loss and what it means to lose things. And at the beginning, it's not a big deal, and we kind of laugh with this person, like, everybody's lost door keys, right? That's not hard to do. Yeah, we've all lost names and places that we were thinking about. You're right; that's not hard to do. So it starts off kind of maybe not funny, but lighthearted and whimsical a little bit. Mother's watch. Oh yeah, we've all lost something really important to us, a piece of jewelry or our favorite bracelet, whatever, right? Something that meant a lot to us, and keep going. A lot of people have lived in different houses. A lot of people can relate to that, or lived in different cities, and like, yep, sometimes you just got to move. And these things are not a disaster, right? But what becomes a disaster is perhaps losing this person, and we get a few clues of that this is actually maybe a bigger deal than the speaker is letting on. So that joking voice, a gesture I love. This is like the only time we see a lot of any development about something she's lost, any sort of details. And it's a very kind of specific detail that is mentioned here, right? And then she says, I shan't have lied. That's a curious line. I read this to mean she shouldn't have lied about the whole thing of losing, not being a disaster, right? So anyways, interesting line here. And then if you look closely, the art of losing is not too hard to master. She's changed that up. It goes from isn't hard to master to not too hard. It's like she's edging towards something, right? And then at the end she says, though it might look like, write it, like disaster. It's like she's telling herself to write that it might look like disaster. Like, you got to put that on paper. But as she's doing it, it's like she has her doubts. Is it actually a disaster to lose this person, right? And so obviously there's a theme here of loss, and how maybe I think it's a really complex poem, really beautiful poem. And so there's a lot of things you could say about what the theme is, especially when we look at the rhyme scheme and we look at the repetition. But we might say that one of the themes is that it's really easy to lose things in life. Some things are simple, but some things are even things you really want to hold on to. And that maybe you could also argue that all things that you lose kind of add up and kind of chip away and become a disaster. Or maybe it isn't a disaster to lose a lot of things, but there are very few things towards the end, like very specific people you love. And when you lose those are actually disasters, even though we try to convince ourselves and obsess over it not being a disaster, or it not being that big of a deal, and we kind of meditate or work through that, it still can be. Okay, so this is the villanelle. This is the poem. And this is why one of the reasons why rhyming might matter, or that repetition might matter. As the poem repeats these lines over and over again, especially at the end, it creates a tension, right? You start to say, whoa, maybe this person's talked about this a lot. Like, maybe this is a bigger deal than they're letting on. Maybe we go from it like, it's not a big deal at the beginning, kind of joking about it. But as it repeats, the tension builds, and we realize that it is a big deal, at least losing some things, like a person you love. Okay, so that speaker occasion shift, that's our rhyme scheme, and a little note about approximate line, and then a note about repetition, especially in a poem like the villanelle, like this one. Love villanelles. There's not a whole lot out there, but when you find one, it's usually really good, and you'll get to see a villanelle later in the work that you do. Okay.